All right, hello everyone. Guten Morgen. That's the only German I know. I actually used to know German in high school. I studied German for 4 years, and at some point my English and my German was kind of equal. And then I went to study in the US, and then my English progressed more, and then I forgot about German. But it's always great to be back in German-speaking countries like Austria, because I can pick some words when people speak. So it's always good, like as a way to remember German. So today we're going to talk about building .NET apps on Google Cloud. Actually, it's a wrong title, because this should be titled like building apps on Google Cloud, because all the stuff that I'm going to talk about, they apply to any language that you might want to use. The reason why I talk about .NET is that I'm a .NET C# person, because I used to work at Microsoft, so I did a lot of .NET development. And now all my demos are based on .NET. But everything I talk about, they can be pretty much done with any kind of language. And we're going to be using Dialogflow, machine learning, and BigQuery, because running apps just in the cloud by themselves, they're not that interesting in my opinion. But what makes Google Cloud more interesting is that we have things like Dialogflow for voice-driven application. We have machine learning. We have BigQuery for big data. So using those in your application, it makes it much more interesting. This is my Twitter, Mete Atamel. I'm going to post the slides after my talk. So if you want to get the slides, just follow me on Twitter. And the demo that I'm going to show is already on GitHub. We have Google Cloud Platform GitHub. Under there, there's a .NET section, and under there, there's an application section. So if you want to get the app and run it yourself, you can just go there and get it, OK? So the agenda is, first, I want to do a little bit of introduction of what Google Cloud is, because maybe people don't know, maybe people don't use Google Cloud, so I just want to introduce and make sure that we all understand what it is. Then we're going to look into Dialogflow, because this is a voice-driven application. So what is Dialogflow? How does it help? And I'm going to explain what my demo application is all about. And then from there, we'll get into the cloud stuff. So we're going to look at .NET containers on Google Cloud. So you can run containers on either App Engine or Kubernetes. And I'm going to talk about the differences between the two. And then finally, the last part, the most fun part for me, is using machine learning and big data in our application. I have a Google Mini device. So my plan was to use this in my demo. But for some reason, in public Wi-Fi, sometimes it doesn't connect correctly. So it doesn't work. But it's OK. I can use my phone as well to use my application. So I'll do that and show you the application. And in the end, we should have some time for questions. So I'll answer some questions. But maybe you've seen also, we also have a Google Cloud booth. So I will be there after my talk. So if you have more questions, we can be there as well. That's not my application, by the way. All right, so let's do an introduction. Before I start, I want to know who is running an application in the cloud, in any cloud today? AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. OK, so who is running on Google Cloud? A few people. OK, good. That's good. Because a couple of years ago, when I started working for Google, when I asked, no one knew Google Cloud. Now I feel like there's more and more people know and use it. So what is Google Cloud Platform? It's basically a platform to build applications on. So we have things on compute. So to deploy application, you have Compute Engine, App Engine, Kubernetes Engine. There's a lot of stuff for storage. So there's cloud storage for storing binary data. There's Bigtable for NoSQL. There's Data Store. There's a lot of networking pieces. There's big data, like BigQuery, that I'm going to talk about. There's machine learning, vision API, speech API. There's identity and security. There's management tools, developer tools. So there's a lot of things in here. I'm not going to cover all of them. But I just want to let you know that it's a big platform to do pretty much whatever you want. To let you know, the BigQuery piece that I'm going to talk about, I'm just going to talk about briefly. But my coworker, Felipe Hoffa, he has a talk tomorrow morning where he gets into details of BigQuery, and he shows, I think he shows GitHub. He ingests all the GitHub data, and he analyzes it using BigQuery. So if you're interested, there will be a whole session on BigQuery tomorrow. So if you want to deploy your application on Google Cloud, you basically have a spectrum of highly customizable and highly managed. So if you want things to be highly customizable, by definition, they're going to be less managed. But if you want things to be managed by Google for you, by definition, they're going to be less customizable. So for highly customizable side, there's Compute Engine. Compute Engine is the virtual machines in Google Cloud. That's what we call them. They can be Linux virtual machines, or they can be Windows virtual machines. You basically pick and choose what kind of configuration you want with CPU and memory. And within like 30 seconds, you get the VM, and you can SSH into it, and you can do whatever you want. There's also something called Cloud Launcher, which is a solution page to deploy solutions to Compute Engine instances. For example, you can search for ASP.NET solution, And then once you hit click, it will get you a Compute Engine VM with Windows Server installed, with ASP.NET Framework installed, with IIS installed, and with SQL Server Express installed. So it's just a one-click install solution kind of place that you can use to deploy to Compute Engine. So that's on the highly customizable side. And once you have the Compute Engine instance, you are in charge. You can install whatever you want. You can customize whatever you want. But at the same time, you are responsible of it. So if you install anything on these machines, it's up to you to keep it up to date. Google is not going to help you with that. On the highly managed side, there's cloud functions. So you guys know probably Lambda on AWS. It's a similar concept. In cloud functions, you define a Node.js function. You define the inputs and outputs to that function. And you define what triggers that function. And then just deploy the function. And it's fully managed for you. You don't have to worry about machines. You don't have to worry about software. You just define your function and let Google manage that for you, scale that for you. Today, Node.js is the only language supported on cloud functions, but we are also working on to support other languages like Java, C#, Python in the future. And somewhere in the middle, we have App Engine and Kubernetes Engine. So the idea of App Engine is similar to cloud functions in the sense that it's very highly managed, but it's not just a single function. It's more than a function. It's more like an application where you can have multiple microservices defined, and then you still define your code and you still deploy your code. Under the covers, that code gets run on virtual machines, but those virtual machines are managed for you, so you don't have to worry about them yourself. So that's App Engine, but then App Engine is good and it's easy, but it doesn't give you that much customization. People sometimes they want to be able to define a container cluster, and they want to be able to individually scale containers, and they want to be able to define how containers talk to each other. So for that, there's an open source project called Kubernetes, and there's a managed version of that in Google Cloud called Kubernetes Engine. So that's what it is, and if you want more management than App Engine and more customization than App Engine, you can use Kubernetes Engine and deploy your application there as well. And then we also have Container Builder to build containers in the cloud. It's very fast and scalable. And if you want to host your containers in the cloud, there's something called Container Registry. It's a place where it's a private space for your containers to be stored, and you can, once it's stored, you can deploy them to Kubernetes Engine, or you can deploy them to App Engine. So that's kind of like the spectrum that you have when you deploy an application to Google Cloud. Today, we're going to look into App Engine because that's where I deploy my application. But once you have a container, it's basically up to you where you want to deploy it. You can choose to deploy it on App Engine or Kubernetes Engine or even Compute Engine if you want to. Now, in terms of .NET people, who is .NET developer here, by the way? OK, good. So you know. OK, great. So in terms of .NET development, as you know, .NET world is divided into two now, right? The .NET that runs on Windows, the .NET traditional that we are used to, and the .NET Core, the new .NET that runs on everywhere, on Windows, Linux, and Mac. So if you're a traditional .NET developer on Windows, you can get a Compute Engine instance with Windows Server, and you can deploy your application from Visual Studio or from anywhere else to that instance as if it's a normal machine. But if you switch to .NET Core running on Linux, you can take that .NET Core application, containerize it using Docker, and then deploy to App Engine Flex, or you can deploy to Kubernetes Engine. And I'm going to talk about the differences of the two. But this is the choice that you have when it comes to .NET development. And also, if you are a .NET developer, you're probably used to using SQL Server, so you can get a SQL Server instance on Compute Engine. But it's not managed, so you can get it, but you have to manage it yourself. There's a Visual Studio plugin from Google that you can use. So it's an extension that you can install in Visual Studio, and you can use that to manage Google Cloud resources. There's a lot of .NET libraries on NuGet already that I'm going to show you some of the samples today. And finally, there's PowerShell commandlets. So if you want to script things, there's a lot of commandlets for Google Cloud that you can install, and you can use scripting to script your management of Google Cloud resources. All right, so that's what we have for .NET people. Now I want to talk a little bit about Dialogflow and my demo application so that it makes sense to you. Who heard of Dialogflow before? One person. Wow. OK. I wish I had a T-shirt for you, but I don't. Sorry. But if you come to Google Cloud booth, maybe we will have a T-shirt for you. So Dialogflow, it's a framework to build conversational applications. So applications where you can talk to. And then it accepts many inputs. So it can work from Google Home Mini, or even from my phone. And then it can also output to different places. So it can output to chatbots and Skype and things like that. So it's basically a framework to build conversational applications. It used to be a separate company, but Google bought them recently, so they're part of Google Cloud right now. As I mentioned, it works on any platform. It works on pretty much any kind of devices, and it's global. It works globally as well. So it's a good platform to use if you want to build conversational applications. And it works with Google Assistant, and that's what we're going to use today. So Google Assistant is a way to write applications for Google Home and also for phones as well. So Dialogflow has integration with Google Assistant, and that's what we're going to use today to take a look. And one of the things that I like about Dialogflow is that it has machine learning built in it, so you don't have to worry about it yourself. For example, if someone says, book a flight from Los Angeles to Hawaii for less than $300, it will detect this, and it will pick out the entities from it. So it will pick up that Los Angeles is a city. It will pick up the fact that Hawaii is a location. It will pick up that $300 it's some amount of money, and it will give you that information in your application to use. And the other cool thing about that is that you don't have to enumerate all the different ways or they can say this phrase. You just give it some samples of what people can say, and it will figure out from there using machine learning what kind of phrases can trigger that endpoint, right? So, and I'll show you some of the examples of that. But basically, you just give it some examples, and you mark some entities, and tell Dialogflow, this is the kind of things that I want people to say, and this is the kind of things that I want you to pick from that and apply and pass it to my endpoint. And Dialogflow will figure it out, and it will get better and better as people use it more. So it's a really cool platform. And I've been programming for a long time, and sometimes you have to program because you have to get some work done, but it's not that exciting. And sometimes you program because it's so much fun. And when I built this demo on Dialogflow, it was so much fun that I was like thinking about it when I was going to sleep, stuff like that, because it's so much fun to work in Dialogflow. All right, so the application that I want to show you is something like this. So we have the Google Home Mini or my phone talking to Google Assistant, and then Dialogflow is the one managing my Google Assistant application. And then once I have the phrases going through Google Assistant and Dialogflow, Dialogflow will call an endpoint that I have. This endpoint will be over HTTPS, and it will be running in Google Cloud. It's a .NET container, and I deploy it to App Engine, but you can also deploy it on GKE, on Google Kubernetes Engine as well. It's up to you. I use App Engine because it's easier, but if you are using Kubernetes, you can also deploy it there. And then this container will make a call to Vision API. It's a machine learning API for some machine learning that I'm going to show you. It also uses BigQuery to do some big data analysis. And it uses Stackdriver, which is Google Cloud's monitoring, debugging, logging tool. Because my application, I can tell my application throw an exception. It will throw an exception, and Stackdriver will detect that and will display it for me. And I'm also using Google Search, so I'm doing some custom search from my container to Google Cloud. So this is kind of my application. Let's see if this is going to work. So I want to first show, let's see if it's going to work from my phone. So I have a demo page that will display some results. But what I want to do is when you start with these applications, you can use Google Assistant, and you have to say that you want to talk to your test app. And now, all right, let's see. All right, so let me talk to my test app.
OK, let's get the test version of my test app. Welcome to Google Home meets .NET Containers on Google Cloud Demo.
All right, so that's the demo. And now I'm going to ask it where it's running. So it's picking my voice.
Running on Google App Engine. Project ID is Home meets .NET Containers.
Yeah, so let's stop it before it responds more. But basically, I asked it, where are you running? And it picked up my voice. Even though I was saying other things in my voice, it picked up the fact that I'm asking it where it's running, and it's telling me that it's running on Google App Engine, and this is my project ID. And just to show you how this works, so this is Dialogflow console. So that's where you define your Dialogflow application. And the first thing that you realize is that I have this agent called Google Home meets .NET Containers. Agent is basically a project for your Dialogflow application. And in this agent, you define what it is responsible of. And if you look under here, there's intents. So what kind of things this application can provide. And then there's fulfillment. So these are the things that will fulfill the intents. So if you look at the intents, for example, there's a default fallback intent. So if I say something to Dialogflow that it doesn't understand, it will basically say these phrases for me. So if I say, for example, hello, how are you?
Welcome to Google Home meets .NET Containers on Google Cloud Demo.
Do you understand this? Do you understand this?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah, so now what happened is that it falls back to this intent. So this is the default fallback intent. There's also a welcome intent. So when you start the application, this is the one that says, welcome to Google Home meets .NET Containers. So right now, I'm handling everything within the console. But what you can do is you can also, I have another intent called, let's see, platform describe. So this is, in here, we have something called what environment are you executing in what environment are you running. So when I ask things like this, it will call a webhook. So what this means is that it will pick up my voice, and it will call an endpoint that I defined. So that endpoint is under fulfillment. So under fulfillment, I define an HTTPS endpoint. And if you look at it, this is home meets.NET containers appspot.com. So it's a App Engine Flex application / conversation. So it goes to that endpoint, and the endpoint handles my requests. You can handle it within the console itself. So you can have a JavaScript function like written here, and it will, once you define this function, it will be deployed to Google Cloud automatically, and it will be handled for you. But in this case, I just did a .NET endpoint, and I'm just pointing to that URL from here. Okay? And if I'm going to show you the code later, but basically this is how you set things up with Dialogflow. So you have an agent, you have intents on what kind of things people can do, and you can map to an endpoint that will handle those intents. But we'll take a look at those intents later. Okay? So let's go back to our presentation. So that's my app. So my app is running now within a container. And I think most people know this, but just to be on the same page, a container is basically a lightweight way of virtualizing your applications, right? Before containers, we used to have virtual machines where we were virtualizing the whole operating system and everything that goes on top of it. But with containers, now we are virtualizing the process and the dependencies of our process and the environment itself. So it's much more lightweight, and it's sealed and isolated, so you can have multiple containers running on a single machine. They're easy to deploy, easy to introspect, and they're composable, meaning you can have layers of dependencies as images, and people can build their image on top of your image, stuff like that. When it comes to Google Cloud and .NET containers, you can deploy to App Engine Flex, or you can deploy to Kubernetes Engine. So App Engine Flex, it's basically an easy way to deploy containers. What you do is you write your application in ASP.NET Core, you create a Docker file that basically containerizes your application, and then you just say gcloud app deploy. So it's a command line tool to deploy .NET containers to Google Cloud, and then just deploy your container, and Google Cloud will take your app, build it in the cloud, it will host it in container registry, and it will deploy to App Engine Flex. In App Engine Flex, you get dashboards, you get versioning, so you get different versions of your application every time you deploy. You get traffic splitting, so you can split the traffic between different versions, and you get auto-scaling. So by default, your container is deployed on 2 machines, but it can auto-scale up to 20 machines without you having to do anything. It's done automatically for you. So just to show you my app, if I come here, so this is Google Cloud Platform Console, and I'm in my project, and on this left, there's a bunch of different places I can deploy my application, but in this case, I deploy it to App Engine. So if you look at App Engine, so by default, you get a dashboard. And under dashboard, I have version 3. That's the version that I deployed before this talk. It's getting the traffic. I can have multiple services. So these services are kind of like microservices of my application. In this case, I'm just using one microservice because it's a simple application, but you can have multiple microservices. You can have multiple versions, so every time you deploy your application, you can get a new version. And once you have different versions, like now I have only one version that's getting 100% of the traffic, and that's running on one instance. But you can have multiple versions, and you can split the traffic. So you can come here and split the traffic, and You say, this version gets 50% of the traffic, this version gets the other 50%. And you can also see the instances. So these are the VMs that's running my application. You can SSH into them, but you don't have to because they're managed for you. So that's what you get by default in App Engine. Now, for some people, this is enough. And for my demo, it's definitely enough. But for others, people want more than App Engine. They want to be able to define a container cluster. So there's a project called Kubernetes. You probably heard about it. It's an open source container management platform. And there's a version of it called Google Kubernetes Engine, which is a managed version of it running in Google Cloud. So if you want, you can use GKE as well. And to use it, you just say gcloud container clusters create. This will create a Kubernetes cluster running in Google Cloud with a master and with the nodes. And then once you have that, you can use kubectl just like regular Kubernetes to manage a Kubernetes cluster. I won't show you this because I didn't deploy my application to Kubernetes, but it's an option for you, basically. It's up to you where you want to deploy it. All right, now is the interesting part for me. I wanted to go through this quickly so I can show you the interesting parts. So now let's look at the machine learning. Who is using some kind of machine learning in their applications today? A couple people. So when you want to use machine learning, you basically have two choices, right? The first choice is you want to use someone's pre-trained model. So someone learns about machine learning, they have data, they train that data, they build a model, and then they give you an API to use that model, and you just use that API to use machine learning. But as a programmer, you're not really dealing with machine learning directly. You let someone else figure out machine learning for you, and give you a model that you can use. So I call this the easy way of using machine learning. And if you can, I think this is a good way of using machine learning because you don't have to deal with the complexity of machine learning itself. But sometimes you have to actually build your own machine learning model because maybe the model that's given to you, it's not enough. Maybe you need to customize it. So for that kind of use cases, you need to actually build your own machine learning model, and you need to train it yourself. So most people, they use something called TensorFlow to build their model, and then once they build their model, they expose it to the outside world using some kind of endpoint. So that's kind of like the hard way of using it, but sometimes you have to do that. In Google Cloud, there's machine learning APIs. So these are easy ways of using machine learning because Google basically has the data, they have the expertise, and they build these models for you. And you can just use an API to call them and get some results. So there's something called natural language API for passing some text and getting the analysis about the text, the sentiment in the text. There's speech API for speech to text. There's translation API. And there's vision API that I'm going to show you today, which is about vision. So you pass in an image, and it tells you everything about that image that it can. And there's more and more coming. So every 3 or 4 months, there's a new machine learning API that's been coming, or a new feature gets added. So these are the easy ways of using machine learning on Google Cloud. So what I want to show you now is that in our application, I basically use Vision API to analyze some images. So what I do is I talk to my app, I say, find some images. It will go to Google. It will search some images, get us the images back. Then I will ask some questions about the image using Vision API and see what we get. So let's take a look at this. So let me go back here. Just refresh this, and let's hope it works. Let me talk to my test app.
Sorry, what was that?
Oop. Let me talk to my test app.
Sorry, I can't help.
All right, I think it's already in my app, so let's see. I want to use Vision API.
Take a look at these results.
Oh, it's not working.
First is from Google.
Sorry, I will try one more time. Let me talk to my test app.
Okay, let's get the test version of my test app. Welcome to Google Home meets .NET Containers on Google Cloud Demo.
Search, I want to use Vision API.
Okay, you can ask Vision API to search for images first. What do you want?
Search for images of Vienna.
Found some pictures of Vienna. Now, select a picture.
Select the first picture. Select the first picture.
Picture 1 selected. You can describe, show landmarks, or ask whether the image is safe.
Can you describe the image?
This picture is labeled sky, horizon, cloud, city, morning, dawn, cityscape, and sunset.
Okay. Go back to list of images.
Okay, looking at all images now.
Select the second picture.
Picture 2 selected. You can describe, show landmarks, or ask whether the image is safe.
Are there landmarks in this picture? Oh, no.
This picture is labeled reflection, landmark, water, sky, tourist attraction.
Are there landmarks in this picture?
This picture contains
no.
SCHANB Run Palace.
Okay, so it's some palace. I think Schaubern? Yeah. It doesn't recognize the German character, but it figured out it's some palace. And let's ask whether it's safe. Is this picture safe?
Let's see. This picture is fine.
Okay, good. So let me describe what happened. So basically, we did a search with Google Cloud, with Google Search to get the images. And then I use Vision API to describe the image. So it will pass the image to Vision API, and the Vision API will use machine learning to describe the image to us. So it picked up the fact that there's clouds and things like that. Then there's something called landmark detection in Vision API that will detect whether there's a landmark. And then you can also do safety checks. So detect whether the picture is safe, whether it contains violent images or adult images. So that's what I used. So to do this, I just want to show the code briefly. So this is my code that's on GitHub that you can take a look. I have a controller. This conversation controller is the main controller that will take the request. And let me make this a little bit bigger. But basically, once a request comes in, it calls the Dialogflow app to handle the requests. And this Dialogflow app under here, it has a handle request. Let me move this a little bit. It will basically get the request. It will either create a conversation for it, or it will get an existing conversation that exists. Once we have the conversation, we need to handle that request. So we pass that request to the conversation. And what I have here is that I have classes for each intent, right? So for BigQuery intents, they are here. For Vision intents, they're here. And then I have some base handlers. So that's the base things for my handlers. But under Vision, if you look at under Vision, there's a Vision search handler, for example. This will be called when we search an image. It will get the search term, and then it will create a search client. So that's a Google custom search. And it will get some images, and then it will show the images in the web page, and it will tell us I found these images. But if I want to describe the image, then this is the one that will be called. One thing that you realize is that at the top of this class, there's Google Cloud Vision v1. So this is the NuGet package that we are using to do the Vision API call. And in here, we are basically creating a Vision client. So this is the client that we use to make the Vision API calls. And then we are saying detect label async and pass in the image, basically. So we just make one API call, pass the image, and say label this image. And we get the labels back from the Vision API. And we just say those labels. So we just tell Dialogflow, can you say this? And it will say it. So that's it, one call. For landmark detection, it's the same thing. Come here, create a client, and then instead of calling label, now we are saying detect landmark async, and that's it. And then for safety, so whether the image is safe, again, the same thing. Create a client and make a single call that says detect whether this is safe or not, and just say it, right? So that's all there is to it. Now I want to go back to my app. So that's Vision API. And then there's something called BigQuery. Who heard of BigQuery before? Anyone? A few people. OK. So as I mentioned, there's a talk on this tomorrow. But just to let you know, BigQuery, it's a way to do big data analysis in Google Cloud. The idea is that you ingest your data in BigQuery, and then you use SQL to run queries against that data. And the thing about BigQuery is that it's really, really, really fast. So you can analyze like gigabytes or terabytes of data within a few seconds. So that's the main selling point of BigQuery. And then BigQuery has lots of public data sets. So for example, we ingest all GitHub pages in BigQuery, and you can do analysis on that. We do all the Hacker News data ingest into BigQuery, and you can do analysis on that. And I think you get like 1 terabyte of queries per month for free. So if you want to play with it, there's this public data sets that you can use, and then there's all these free things that you can do with BigQuery to play with it. So I just want to show you how we can use that in your .NET applications. In this case, I am using 2 public data sets. One is called the Hacker News, so I want to run some queries against Hacker News. And the other one is for temperature. So there's a temperature database where we keep track of all the temperature in all cities of the world since I don't know when. So I'm just going to run some queries against that and see what we get. But before I do that, I just want to show you BigQuery quickly. So if you go to Google Cloud and if you go to BigQuery, this is the console that you get. And then make this a little bit bigger. And these are the public data sets. So these are all the data sets that you get by default that you can query against. And for example, in this case, I am running a query against Wikipedia. So we have all the Wikipedia data. And what I want to do is, I did a talk in Bangalore in India, and I want to look at Wikipedia data, and I want to find articles that have the title Bangalore or Bangalore, because in Indian, Bangalore is Bangalore. So I want to basically do a regular expression match against the titles and find those articles. So I'm going through all the Wikipedia page counts from 2016-05, so that's May 2016, and match the title with regular expression. So if you do this, and if I do run query, now I'm running it, and it took 1.6 seconds, and I think we analyzed, I don't know how many, but it doesn't say here, but it's a lot of database that you analyze within a few seconds. So that's the kind of stuff that you can do. So let's see what we can do in our application. So I'm going to go back here. And I will say, I want to search for news.
OK, you can ask BigQuery about top hacker news or global temperatures on a certain day.
What was the top hacker news in...
What is the date?
All right. April 1st, 2017.
Scanned 0 megabytes in 0.8 seconds. The top title on Hacker News was titled, Why Japanese Rail Workers Point at Things.
OK, I think there's a bug because it's definitely not 0 megabytes. But basically what happened here is that when I talked about it, it created this BigQuery SQL, and it passed in the parameter, the April 1st, and then it tells us the first 10 Hacker News. But let's try one more just to make sure. What was the most popular Hacker News on April 1st, 2018?
What is the date?
April 1st, 2018.
Scanned 0 megabytes in 0.8 seconds. The top title on Hacker News was titled 1.1.1.1 Fast, Privacy First Consumer DNS Service. All
right, so I think there is a bug with my megabytes. But basically, you've seen how fast it is. It's searching for all Hacker News on a given date, and it's listing us the first 10 ones, and it's using regular SQL to do that. The other thing that I have is basically we have the temperature data from all places. So let's ask for that and see what we get. What was the hottest temperature in Austria in 2017?
Scanned 5,225 megabytes in 4.0 seconds. The hottest temperature in Austria in the year 2017 was 37.6 degrees Celsius at the LUGPLATZ Veslau monitoring station.
I don't know, does that sound right? Yeah? I don't know where this place is, but yeah. So in this case, I think my megabytes are working. So it scanned like 5 gigs, I guess, in 4 seconds, and it's telling us that it's this place. I don't know where it is, but 37.6, yeah, which is kind of hot. All right, so to show you the code briefly, so for BigQuery, let me show you the data flow first. So if you look at dialog flow, I have this intents, and in some of these intents, we have the BigQuery one. So BigQuery intro is what happens when you say, I want to use BigQuery. Then it says, OK, you can ask BigQuery about top hacker news. So this is handled within dialog flow itself. But then once you're in BigQuery, you can say Hacker News, for example. And then in this intent, I'm saying what was on Hacker News yesterday, what was on top Hacker News yesterday, what was the most popular Hacker News article on certain date. As you can see, I just gave it some samples of what kind of stuff people can say, but it doesn't have to be the full list. So from this list, it learns how people can say things. And I'm also marking yesterday as an entity. It's a date, so it will pick a date. And if I don't say a date, it will ask me which day. That's why it was asking me which day. So once we have this, and once it gets into this intent, it will be, you can either handle it here, or you can handle it with a webhook. So in my case, I'm handling with a webhook, right? And the webhook is under fulfillment. It will go to this endpoint that I have running in the cloud. And now if you look at the actual code that handles this, so in Dialogflow, I have intents, and in BigQuery, I have a base class that handles the base things. But then if you look at the Hacker News one, so here, well, first thing that you're going to realize is that, again, I'm using a NuGet package, Google Cloud BigQuery version 2. And then once I get the request, I pick the date. Then I create a BigQuery client. Then I am using the BigQuery public data, Hacker News. So I told you about the public data sets that we have. And then I'm just constructing a SQL query that I show you from the console itself, and then with some parameters. So that's the date that I'm passing in. And then I show the query in the browser. And then I just execute the query, get results back, stop my watch, and then I have a result list. If it's 0, then I say I don't have any results. Otherwise, I get some statistics about my results, so the process megabytes, seconds, and titles, and I show the query that I ran, and then I use Dialogflow app tell to tell what I did, right? So that's all there is to it. And similarly, the temperature example is pretty much the same. Get a client, and then construct this. So the hardest part is constructing this query. But you can use the console to get the query and just put it in your code, and it works, and then just run it, OK? And last thing I want to show you is that actually my app can throw some exceptions. So if I do, can you throw an exception?
My test app isn't responding at the moment.
It's not responding because it threw an exception. But I have an integration to something called Stackdriver in Google Cloud. Stackdriver, it's a platform to do logging, error reporting, tracing, debugging, everything on Google Cloud. And one of those things is called error reporting. What happens is that in error reporting, it basically catches all the uncaught exceptions, and it displays here. So I have some timeout exception, for example, in here. And then this exception, just now, as you can see, if I click on it, I can see all the exceptions that I throw. So this is when I say throw an exception, it goes to an intent. From the intent, it goes to my code, and my code throws an exception, and it's not handled, and then Stackdriver catches it, and it displays it here. So it's very useful when you want to catch exceptions and display them and see their frequency and things like that. The other thing there is in Stackdriver is debugging. I won't show it here because we only have 4 minutes left. But in debugging, you can basically put your code here, and you can set a breakpoint. And then when the code gets hit, it will take a snapshot of your code, of that state, and your code will continue running. but in that snapshot, you can see the whole stack trace and all the states of the variables. So it's very useful for debugging live in production. All right. So it's time to wrap up. Let's see if I have something else. No, I don't have anything else. So that's all I had. If you want the slides, this is my Twitter. If you want the code, this is the GitHub. And we have 3 minutes, so we're going to answer some questions, right? Thank you.
Amazing job. OK, can we have questions? Amazing. So first question. When your app fails, do you blame Google or .NET?
Well, I don't know. It depends on the application failure, I guess. No, I mean, I don't know.
OK, what about security when the companies manage sensitive data from their customers? Can we use Google Cloud?
Yes, I mean, when you use Google Cloud, you create a project. It's your project. It's your resources. We don't get in there and look at stuff. We don't look at your data. You can even provide your own encryption keys, and only you will be able to decrypt it. So yes, I mean, if it wasn't secure, we wouldn't tell people to use it, because we take security really seriously. Yeah, so yes.
OK, is there support for the new regulations in Europe? How is that handled?
Yeah,
the data protection, yeah.
Yes, there's a whole page on it that we explain what kind of steps we do to make that easy for people. Yeah.
OK. And the last question for today, language support on Dialogflow.
So in Dialogflow, by default, Node.js is the language. And as you've seen in the console, you can actually define a Node.js function right in there and deploy it right there. So that's kind of like the main language. But I know they have some SDKs for other languages as well coming up, or they're already there. But if you had to do everything, then you would use Node.js basically on Dialogflow. For my .NET application, for example, the Dialogflow app that I show you, the actual class, I built that myself, looking at the Node.js SDK and kind of trying to build something similar for .NET. What I intend to do is basically pass that code to the Dialogflow team and see if they want to build something for .NET as well. But it's not there today. So Node.js is the main one as of today.
OK, thank you very much. One more applause.
All right, thank you.